Lawmaking. Lawmaking is what Congress does. It makes laws. That's the function, the main function of the legislative branch. You remember that in the Constitution there is a list of power which Congress is supposed to have, a list of domains in which it can make laws, in which it can act. There are several broad categories. The first is financial matters. Congress has a responsibility over taxes, over the federal budget, and over federal grants. Grant means the money which the federal government can give to certain organizations, or to the states, or to a school district, etc. So Congress controls the money, which means that Congress has an enormous power. And because of this power, Congress is often targeted by lobbyists. Lobbyists are interest groups, people who want to influence the law, who want to make sure that their interests are served by the politicians. Let's have a look at a political cartoon. This is a cartoon which was published recently in 2011 and with a reference to the popular movement Occupy Wall Street, a movement which protested against the existence of very rich people in the United States, arguing that there was that 1% of the United States, of the people in the United States, were accruing too much power, that they had simply too much money, too much power. And the slogan of Occupy Wall Street was, "We are the 99%." Here we have a lobbyist. A lobbyist, someone who is in charge of influencing the US Congress. There are people carrying bags of money with them, dollar notes on the floor. And this is all happening on K Street. K Street rather than Wall Street. Why K Street? Because K Street is the street in Washington, D.C. where you find the lobbyists. And in the background, you may recognize a building which you saw on the very first slide of this lecture, which is the US Capitol. So, this is a cartoon which says the real power is, financial power is not in Wall Street. The real power is in K Street, the street where lobbyists work, because they are able to influence the US Congress. And let me call your attention to the fact that there is no label on the Capitol. You are supposed to know what it looks like. You are supposed to know also what K Street is. And this is what I said in the conclusion of my first lecture. You have to know the places. You have to know what power looks like. You have to know where power is. K Street is right here in Washington, D.C. So very close to the White House. And just to give you a few figures so you can realize how important lobbying is in the United States. There are 40 lobbyists per representative. If you remember that there are more than 400 representatives, that's 60,000 lobbyists with nearly $5 million invested each year to influence each member of Congress, each representative. So enormous sums, an enormous amount of money, and it testifies to the influence and the role of Congress. And this power, this influence, derives mostly from the fact that it controls financial matters. But of course, financial matters are not the only domain in which Congress has power, according to the Constitution. It can also legislate on foreign affairs, war, treaties, tariffs, everything which has to do with the relationships between the United States on the one hand and foreign nations on the other. And Congress also have power in certain specific areas: intellectual property, interstate commerce, the post office, etc. Interstate commerce is important because this is the reason why the Constitutional Convention was convened. So, an important power to have. Congress can also interact with the executive branch. It confirms nominations, which means that the president chooses people for certain roles in the federal government, and Congress confirms these nominations. Congress checks that these people are acceptable. Congress can even impeach the president. It can even get rid of the president if the president is found guilty of treason, bribery, accepting money, or other high crimes and misdemeanor. For this, you need a single majority in the House of Representatives and a two-thirds majority in the Senate. Just imagine if the same thing existed in France. It would mean that l'Assemblée nationale could force the president to quit his job. That might have happened in the past. In the United States, this power, this enormous power, hasn't been abused. During the Watergate, Richard Nixon was about to be impeached, but he resigned before the Senate could vote. Bill Clinton in the late 20th century was almost impeached. Impeachment was approved in the House, but not in the Senate. And of course, another enormous power which Congress has is the power of proposing constitutional amendments, changing the Constitution. That's something Congress can trigger. As we saw in the first lecture, it needs to have the approval of the states, but still an enormous, important power. On the other hand, Congress cannot create taxes on commerce between the states. It cannot get rid of the judicial process, and there are certain rights which, as we saw, are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, following the principle that if a power is not listed in the Constitution, it is retained by the people or the states, 9th and 10th Amendments. So these are the domains in which Congress can act. Now let's have a look. How do you make a law? You first have to know a word, a bill. A bill is a project. It's not a law, it's a text which could become a law. So a bill is a project, a law is something which can be applied. So we start with a bill, a project, introduced in one of the chambers. Let's say it's introduced in the House of Representatives. So first it's introduced. Then it's debated in a committee. A committee is a smaller assembly of experts, members of the House of Representatives, in that case, who are specialists of the domain. So the committee will examine the bill. And maybe they will send it to an ad hoc committee. So a committee is created specially for the occasion. And there will be votes. People in the committee will have to approve the bill. Then the bill is sent to the full chamber. The full chamber will examine the bill, amend the bill, vote on the bill. So you say in that case that the bill is sent to the floor to be debated. So there's a debate, there's a vote, and finally the House of Representatives has approved the bill. So it is sent to the other chamber. In my example, that would be the US Senate. The US Senate does the same thing. It can look at the bill, approve it, or it can send it to a committee of experts in the Senate who will examine the bill, change the bill, amend the bill. Eventually, there's a vote by the committee, and there's a vote by the Senate. And at this point, you have two different bills. One approved by the House of Representatives, one approved with changes by the US Senate. So you need to reconcile the two projects. You need to reconcile the two bills. What you do is you send them to a committee composed of members of the Senate, members of the House. And the committee will have a look at the two projects, will try to find a compromise to reconcile the two projects. Then both chambers have to vote again and to approve the bill, the new bill, the compromise bill. There's a vote. If the vote is positive, the bill is sent to the president, who can sign the bill or you can veto the bill. If he vetoes the bill, he is saying that he is opposed to it. And we'll see exactly how it works in the next lecture. But let's just have a look at this for a moment to realize how complex the process is. It's complex, it's long, it's difficult. Why is it so difficult? Because it is necessary to have compromises. This is a system which is meant to encourage compromises. Let's have a look at committees for a brief moment. I mentioned committees in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Why do you have committees? Well, simply because the complete chamber, the full chamber, cannot examine all the bills. You need specialists, you need experts, and you need a process to divide the workload. That's what committees are for. They can hear experts, they can change bills, suggest amendments, and they can choose eventually to send the bills to the floor or not. So they filter the bills before they can be examined by the full chamber. It sounds difficult. Well, in the Senate, there is another element which makes it even more difficult for bills to be passed. And it's a bit technical, so pay attention. This process is called the filibuster, la flibuste. A filibuster means that a senator will try to block or delay a bill. To educate the public, maybe. In this case, you have Ron Paul protesting against the use of drones on American citizens. A filibuster is made possible by a rule in the Senate which says that as long as a senator speaks, he cannot be interrupted. And if he is not interrupted, senators cannot vote. So if you speak for as long as you can, then you make sure there is no vote. You can block the bill, you can delay the bill. You're just wasting time. As long as you can speak, there can be no vote unless 60 senators agree to close the debates, to end the debates with a closing motion. But you need 60 votes. So if someone decides to use the filibuster, you need a majority not of 51 senators, but of 60 senators. And it's extremely difficult to have that. So filibusters are a way to block the legislative process in the Senate. And the problem is, in the past, people really had to talk. So filibusters happened, but they were difficult. They were demanding for the senators who wanted to filibuster. Nowadays, it's purely formal. They don't have to go to the floor and speak. They just have to threaten. They just have to say, I will use the filibuster. And it's sufficient. And it means the other party, the party with the majority, needs to have 60 votes. So the filibuster means that it's even more difficult to get something done in the Senate. That compromise is even more necessary than in the House. And let's finish on the lawmaking process with two slides. this one is about vocabulary. It's about the period during which Congress works or does not work. We say that Congress works when it is in session. So Congress convenes at the beginning of the session, it adjourns at the end of the session, and in between it can go into recess. So there are periods during which Congress does not work. And each session happens over a specific year. So members of Congress works from January to December. But there is a problem with that. Congress is in session until December, except that elections happen in November, and the new session only begins in January, which means that between November and December, we are still in the same session, which means that people who have lost the election can still be working in Congress. It's a deeply unsatisfying situation. And this period between November and January, where the old Congress is still in place, is called a lame duck Congress, un canard boiteux. A lame duck Congress, to indicate that it's not supposed to be working, yet it is. So a lame duck Congress is a specific period of time during which you have a Congress which may not be legitimate. And it's always a difficult transition in US politics. And we'll have that again in late 2014. So pay attention in the media, because surprising things can happen. In the political cartoon, which I'm showing on the left of your screen, you can see the damage done by the lame duck Congress at the end of 2010. This idea that it's a dangerous situation. And this concludes this overview of the lawmaking process. Remember, a long, difficult process meant to generate compromise.